the objectives of the study. So remember, everything that is done in a research work is based on the objectives of the study. And I remember in the session, the first session I had with us, I tried to emphasize this as much as possible, that every aspect of your work, of a manuscript, must be geared towards the objectives of your study. And so the results section is not any different. When presenting the results, it's essential that what we are presenting must be things that answer our objectives or our research questions, right? So the results section, it often starts with a description of the variables of interest. So I'm sure you've had some of the statistics sections, so you know what we mean by variables. I'm sure you've also had some lessons on how to present some of them, but we'll be reviewing some of these things because this is where it comes in the results section. Okay. So firstly, you want to describe what type of variables you worked with. Okay. Your categorical variables, numerical variables, and whatever it is you worked with. So you want to first start by describing all of those variables that are of interest in your work. Then you go on to the test of associations, or what we call the inferential analysis aspects of it. So essentially, there's the descriptive analysis and the inferential analysis. First start with the descriptive, which helps put in perspective what to expect, after which you can now start describing all of the different analysis you did, the test of associations, the regressions, and any further analysis you might have done. Now, the key thing about the result is focus. Okay, so what this means is that you must ensure that you are single-minded in your reporting. And that's because when data has been collected, there's this temptation to report so many things because you will definitely find many interesting things, okay? And at the same time, you may find some non-interesting things. Okay, so those things that are interesting, the temptation is to want to just keep writing and reporting every single thing you find. But that's not the idea. Remember, it's a manuscript you're writing. And if you're submitting it to a journal, there are strict word counts, limitations, restrictions on how much you can write. And again, whoever is your audience, there are certain things they are looking out for. And the things they are looking out for are things that border round your objectives. So if you have data or if you have findings that are not directly linked to what your objectives are. So if you have, let's say, for example, you have 4 objectives and you have some other findings that do not fit into any of those 4 objectives, then you really have no business reporting those findings because they are not geared towards your research objectives. So the very key thing about the result is focus, 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 focus. Now, in the results section, okay, it's usually the shortest part, and that's for obvious reasons. So this is a very, very concise aspect of the work. And that's because you have done the study and you have the results. And those results are not things you're not expected to be writing lengthy stories or beating around the bush. You go straight to the point and be as specific as possible. And again, like we have mentioned, because you have some objectives, your specific objectives, so that should guide the arrangement of your result section. So ideally, each paragraph should report specific outcomes, right? And I've said this before, we should not be distracted with other findings of interest. And if you've done some works before, you've done some studies before, you will agree with me that there's that temptation to want to just keep writing so many things. Let me give an example. Maybe you are doing a study on let's say something simple, maybe prevalence of Ebola virus disease, a very simple study. And because you are doing that study, you just in your tool you were using, your questionnaires, you had a section on social social demographic characteristics. So you collected information on age, on sex, on place of residence, and all of that. Now, you may find out that in your study, having collected all of those data, for instance, you may find out that you have more, let's say, more of the elderly than the young people. Okay, that's an interesting finding, a very, very interesting finding. Now, if one of your objectives was to find out what the determinants of that condition is, then that will be important to reporting those findings you have seen about the age groups. Okay, but if it's just you are just specifically interested only in the prevalence, then if you now go ahead and start telling us, okay, in this age group, we found out that there were more people in the 50 to 60-year age group compared to the 10 to 20, and you go all out and keep emphasizing on that, talking so much about that, then you have veered off, you have run off on a tangent, you have veered off course. So the best thing to have done, you just state it simply because it is only helping you describe your population or the sample you are working with. And that's where it stops. But you don't go further to start talking so much about that, veering off course. But like I said, that will depend on what your objective is. So if the objective is, if you have one of the objectives to be, you want to find out what the determinants are or what the predictors are, okay? Then that could be handy. You can now go further to do some associations, trying to find out, okay, could these differences in age groups, could they have affected the prevalence and all of that? But if it's just a simple prevalence study, okay, where you're not really interested in any other thing, you've stated specifically clearly what your objective is, then you don't have to dwell so much on something that is not your specific objective. I hope that makes sense. All right. Then ideally, your results section should not contain more than 5 tables. I think this is really very important, and that's because you want your work to be as concise as possible. And remember, this is a manuscript writing program, so we're dealing more with manuscript writing for publication, okay? And I specify that to say that it's different when you are working with maybe a thesis or a dissertation. And the difference is that in a dissertation or a thesis or a student project, you want to be as comprehensive and exhaustive as possible. So in such cases, you may see up to 20, 21, 20, you may see a whole lot of tables. That's because it's a dissertation. You are writing for your supervisor, for your examiner, who wants to see whether or not you truly understand what you are doing, and he wants you to be as explicit as possible. So in that case, you are allowed. In fact, if I remember well, when I was doing my when I did my student project, I think I had so many tables. I'm sure I had more than 15, 20 tables. Same thing when I was doing my part 2 dissertation, I had lots of tables. But that works only for dissertation, student projects, and the likes. But when you're working with a manuscript is more concise. What you are trying to do in a manuscript is to present your results as briefly as possible, stating only the most important things. And so the convention is that we don't expect you to have more than 5 tables. There are even some journals that will tell you that your tables and your charts, all of them together combined, must not be more than 5. So again, all of this depends on the journal you are submitting your article to and what their requirements are. And thankfully, they will always clearly specify what their requirements are. So the rule is follow what the requirements are. But typically speaking, we don't expect that you have so many tables. And that's because this is a manuscript you're writing for an academic audience. Now, the next thing I think we should note is about the tables. Your tables should be well labeled such that they can stand alone. What that means is that anybody who just picks up only that table and hasn't seen the full work should be able to make sense, understand what that table is saying completely without even your narratives, all of those things you write under the table or before the table. So if I crop or copy and paste, crop out your table, and I show someone, the person should be able to look at it and say, oh, okay, this table tells me so, 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 and so. So that's very important. Your table should be able to stand alone and they should be well labeled. Figures are important and powerful. Okay, so use figures when you can, and it will also reduce the number of words. So that should be words. It will reduce the number of words in the narrative, right? So how do we now? The next thing we need to know: how do we choose? How do we choose what to use? Which visual aids are more important? How do we know whether to use a table, whether to use a pie chart, to use a bar chart, a bar chart or a bar graph, whether to use a line graph? How do we know when to use what? So like I said, this is more like a re-emphasis or a continuation on the statistics lectures you've had. I know I attended one of them and I know I saw Prof talking with us on some of those concepts. So we'll be revising and reviewing some of those concepts because this is the aspect where it comes in when we want to write out our results. So choosing and using visual aids. Visual aids summarize and emphasize key points and they reduce the narrative length. Again, if you've been following, you will note that our key priority here in manuscript writing is conciseness. That means being as brief as possible, yet capturing all that needs to be captured. Okay, so visual aids summarize and emphasize key points and reduce the narrative length. They simplify information and in this way enhance understanding. So that goes to say that if what you have presented does not enhance understanding, then you have wasted figures, you have wasted your aids. Your aid is no more an aid, it's a distraction. So if you are using visual aids, remember that word aid. Aid means to assist, to help. It should make things better. It should not make things worse. So if you have a figure or a table that is very, very unwieldy, maybe it contains so many information, so much information that it jumbles up and clogs up so many things together. Like you may see some tables that are so packed up with too many things, you have not aided our understanding. You have just thrown it at us and you have made the situation worse for us. So that's not a good table. Or if you see I'll give you a very good example. Maybe if you see a pie chart that has up to like maybe 10 different sectors, you've not helped us because we can't really understand that. Most times when you have pie charts having more than five or six areas or sectors, you have not aided our understanding because it becomes difficult to begin to compare one sector with another sector. All right. So you have not aided our understanding. You have not enhanced our understanding. You have not simplified that information. Rather, you have made a simple information more complex, which is the exact opposite of our visual aids. Then we should also note that, yes, I've mentioned that they improve conciseness and clarity. And when they are well crafted, they add visual appeal. So that's also important. Now, tables are the most used. I think that goes without saying. If you read journals, you've read journal articles, you will always see that. Almost always, you see tables in works. It's especially for health sciences and the kinds of research we do, you are very likely to see tables in most of our works. As a matter of fact, it's more likely that you will see a work with tables without charts than you will see a work with charts without tables. Okay. Or for the most part, you see a combination of both. So tables are really well used, and that's because tables help a great deal. They help us see at a glance what we want to present, especially when we need to compare numbers. Okay, it helps us a great deal, right? So tables are the most used, and in some cases, they are really overused. All right, we'll look at some of those. Okay, Then anything else that's not a table is a figure. So if you are looking at, if you've read articles, you will see when your figures are labeled figure one, so and so, figure two. So figure can be anything apart from a table. So any other thing you see that is diagrammatic, any other thing you see that is an illustration that is not a table is a figure. So it could be numerically based figures such as graphs, and you have lots and lots of graphs, things like the pie charts, the bar charts, okay, the stem and leaf plots, all of those things are graphs, right? They can be documentary. So for some, you may need to show photographs. Perhaps maybe if you did a study in a rural community or any community whatsoever, and you want to show evidence of some of your, maybe you had meetings or you had maybe if it was a key informant interview, you want to show some of those evidence. So there could be photographs, okay? So all of those ones, they are also figures, okay? You could have machine printouts, all right? Things like maybe a scan result. If you are doing maybe a radiological study, you may want to show some of those printouts, okay? So those are also figures, or diagrams, any kind of drawings or diagrams, all right? So any other thing apart from a table that illustrates our results, they are known as figures. And so when numbering our figures, it goes chronologically from figure one, figure two, figure three, and down like that. It's just the same way we label our tables, table one, table two, table three, and on like that. So this shows us how to choose the most effective type of illustration, okay? So I will just brush through this. Now, if we need to present exact values, raw data, or data which do not fit into any simple pattern, so a table is best for that. So an example of that will be if we just want to show, let's say, age categorization, okay? A table could work for that. If we want to show, like most of our studies where we collected social demographic information, social demographics usually come first. And that's because we want to just have a picture, a clear picture of what population group we worked with, okay? So a table helps us present those values. So we can see at a glance how many males, how many females, how many were medical students, how many were dental students. We can just see all of that at a glance, all right? We're presenting those values. Then the next one, when we want to summarize trends, in fact, anytime you hear the word trends, unless otherwise, it's almost always a line graph because line graphs work best for trends. So you know what a line graph is? It shows you trends. So you can look, okay, is there an increasing trend? Is there a downward trend? Is it remaining the same without any changes, no fluctuations? Are there spikes? Okay, so line graphs help us show trends. So for example, if you want to show the trends of Lassa fever cases over the past 10 years, a line graph will be best for that. So you can show in 2001, it was at this level, 2002, it increased, 2003, it increased, 2004, there was a sharp decline, 2005, it increased again. So you can see that trend with a line graph. A line graph helps us summarize trends. That's very, very important to know. So many times when you are working with um, diseases where you need to explain the trends over time, line graphs work best for that. Then bar graphs or bar charts, they are used to dramatize differences or draw comparisons. So, and this is used for qualitative data or what we can also call categorical data for bar graphs. So when you have, for example, you want to show the different continents, the different continents in the world. Maybe you did a study and you just want to, there was a part of it where you need to just show the number of people from each of the continents that participated or something like that. So you can use your bar graphs. So Africa will represent one bar, Europe another bar, Asia another bar, North America, South America, stuff like that. So bar graphs will help you show those differences at a glance. That will help very well for that. So unlike a histogram, I'm sure we know the difference between a bar graph, a bar chart, and a histogram. So a histogram is a bar chart which is joined together. So there are no spaces in between the bars. And that's because histogram works best for continuous data, numerical data in which what you are looking at, all of the values, they, they flow into the other. So there's no sharp distinction in those values. Unlike a bar graph where you have categorical variables, so you use a bar graphs and separate each of the bars with spaces to show that these are categorical data. So you can use normal diagrams to illustrate complex relationships. You can use flowcharts to show sequential processes. You can also use tables to classify information. You can also use pictographs to classify information. So all of these are just different things you can use. When you want to describe relationships, you can also use a line graph, okay, or a table. All right. Yeah. So let's move on. Now let's go back to tables and look at some best practices when it comes to tables, scientific tables. Ideally, our tables should be devoid of vertical lines. So we don't expect to see all of your grid lines in your tables. As a matter of fact, what we just need to see are 3 horizontal lines at the top, at the very bottom, and at the bottom of the headers or the headers of your table. I'll show you an example on the next slide. So we don't want tables showing all of the different grid lines. In scientific tables, we just want, because we want to just see the numbers as clearly as possible, okay? So at the top, at the very bottom, and underneath the header, those are where we want to see horizontal lines. We don't want to see any vertical lines, all right? If abbreviations are overused, the table will no longer be understandable. So if you're using abbreviations, as much as possible, there should be a footnote to explain what those abbreviations are. And let me explain this. So when you're working with tables, if, for example, you have a table that has so many columns, so it becomes a situation where you're fighting for space. And because you are fighting for space, you may not be able to, especially if you're using the portrait form of your work, of your document, rather than landscape. If you're using portraits and you have up to 5, 6 columns, the spaces within which you have to write what you're writing are limited, okay? So at such points, you may need to use abbreviations. So maybe if the columns you were working with were things that had to do with maybe disease conditions, okay, you may not be able to write hypertension fully if the spaces are too few. If you have maybe so many columns, so instead of hypertension or diabetes mellitus, you may write HTN or DM. But if you are writing and using all of those things, you must always put footnotes at the bottom of the tables, okay? So that helps you. Once you put those footnotes at the bottom, anybody that sees the table will be able to understand it. And that's very important because you don't want to just make assumptions that, oh, somebody sees DM. Everybody knows DM is diabetes mellitus. No, somebody may be talking about something else that it's not diabetes mellitus, all right? So it's always best to avoid unnecessary presumption. Don't leave room for people to guess what you mean. Be as specific as possible. So once you use abbreviations, underneath the table, there should be a footnote explaining what those abbreviations mean. So I'll show you an example of, so this is an example of what I was talking about. If you If you look at this table, you will see that it has, this is the line at the top here, then the line at the bottom, then underneath the headers, that's where you have this. So 3 lines, 1, 2, 3. So this other one we have here, this often comes in, this just shows it's also part of the headers, all right? Because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, these 7 columns talk about these scores, right? So what we just want to see are the top, the bottom, then any other horizontal line should be lines beneath your headers, okay? So if you notice, there are no vertical lines. There are no vertical lines. We don't want to see the vertical lines on the table. So this is just a perfect example of how we expect our tables to be when we are presenting our data, right? So this second one here is another good example. The top, the bottom, and then underneath the headers of the table. So that's for, that's what tables are like. So let's still talk a little bit more on what we expect. An effective table should include both the general subjects. Now the title, an effective table title should include both the general subject and enough detail to make sense without the text. Then you may also include details on the sample size. So what that means is, if you look at the example here, age, sex, and social economic profile of NIMR staff in 2019, N is equals to 143. So that tells us how many people were there, I worked on. So inside that, within that table, you can see that. So for some, they may want to put that in the headers, not necessarily on the title, okay? So that's, it also varies based on journal requirements. So whatever your journal requirement is, ensure you follow the journal requirements. But whatever it is, you must make sure that it's included somewhere, either in the title or on the table headers, so that people know what number you are working with. Is always very important. Then another important thing, whichever style you are using, you should be consistent with it throughout your reporting of results. All right. So consistency is key in your table presentation. When including number of tables in one document, use the same terminology and similar titles and headings. It's very important to stay consistent in our table presentation. So let's look at a few other figures and work with and see some other best practices. So line graphs, I've said it, line graphs are good with trends, and they show movements over time. And when we talk about movements over time, that's talking about trends. So we want to see over time, is something increasing? Is it remaining constant? Or is there a decrease, initial decrease, then it remained where it was, then a sharp rise, another decrease, then before it increased again? Or is it just fluctuating mildly, all right, across time from January to December? So line graphs help you show movements over time, all right? So they range from visual representations of trends to depictions of complex advanced statistical analysis, like you can see here. So these are some complex advanced statistical analysis. Or if you are working with so many, a large number of maybe the time frame you are working with is very large and you want to show each of the individual specifics within them. So the line graphs can also help you show some of those zigzag patterns, all right? So for some complex statistical analysis, that could also help. Like one very good example, if for those who are quite familiar with mathematical modeling of infectious diseases, we tend to use some of these graphs, some of these complex analysis to show those zigzag patterns, what you expect if you include this, if you reduce this, okay, if you add vaccination, what happens if you vaccinate so number of people, what does it become? So line graphs help very well with those kinds of information. So we'll move to bar graphs, or also known as bar charts. I'm sure we know what they are. Like I said, they are used for discrete data or for categorical data. Okay, so you know discrete data is a type of numerical data that has spaces. So you can have, it takes only whole numbers, all right? Unlike continuous, where it can take on many different values, it can take on fractions, it can take on decimals. So something discrete, you can represent it as a bar graph. Something discrete or something categorical, you can represent them using bar graphs. And we have some examples here. So let me just quickly read this. Bar graphs are most effective when they run in the direction in which people expect to see them. So your bar graphs could either be vertical bar graphs or they could be horizontal bar graphs. And to explain this second point, for things like time, speed, you expect to see it horizontally. And so you could use horizontal bars for something like speed, for something like distance, okay? So these are horizontal bars. Then this one below here, these are vertical bars. There are also different types of bar charts. You have this one we have here, multiple bar charts, okay? We also have the component bar charts. This one we have at the top right, they are component bar charts, okay, where each bar has different components within, while the multiple bar charts, each category has multiple bars, all right? So then there's the simple bar chart in which it's just a single bar for a single category. So bar graphs are best when you want to represent discrete data or categorical data. Pie charts. Pie charts are well suited for showing the relationship of a number of parts to the whole. So we've seen some examples here. They are not used for comparing areas. They are generally used best as attention-getting devices. And even then, only when visualizing representation of 5 or fewer items. So I alluded to this earlier on. If you have a bar chart that has so many different areas or sectors, you have not aided our understanding. Remember, in presentation of data, you want to use something that helps us best appreciate what you are presenting. So if you are using something that confuses us or makes it more complex, then you have not helped our cause. You have made it worse for us, and that's not what we want to do. Okay, so the training is that for pie charts, you shouldn't use them when you have more than 5 items, because you may not be able to really appreciate. Some may say 6, fine, but like now, if you look at these examples here, this one has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You may not be really able to appreciate what is on this on these pie charts. Like now, this green, this blue, this dark blue, this yellow, you can't really appreciate the differences in clear terms just from this pie chart. Unlike something that has maybe 4 or 5, you can be able to really appreciate it. So once you have so many, it's usually better to use a bar chart. Once you have up to 6, 7, a bar chart may show you in a more easily appreciable way what you need to show us. Okay, so pie charts restrict them for 5 or fewer items as much as possible. We also have pictograms. So pictographs are just they are pictures, essentially pictures of different things. So you could have different types where a symbol can correspond to a specific quantity, just like we can see on this point here. So we have symbols of houses representing access to electricity. Okay. You could also have uniformly sized symbols, each represent a given quantity. So these symbols, these houses, they represent access to electricity. So you can see that African homes, this one's in blue, 25%. Okay, these writings are not too clear, but if you see the numbering, you can see that these ones on red, 54%, they are more. So the quantity is more. the number of houses there are more, showing that these ones have more access compared to the ones in blue and in yellow, right? This is also, so maps too are also like, you could call maps pictures or pictographs, right? When they show you using color codes what you expect to see. So for example, if you see here, the legend here is describing for us what the different colors in the maps represent. Okay, so that's also another visual aid that can help us. So a very good aspect of that will be something like a spot map. So if you want to show disease incidences or prevalences in different locations, or maybe in Africa, or for example, like the COVID-19 pandemic, that time where we were always showing what was happening per time, maybe the map of Nigeria, the map of Africa. So you could use maps to show where you are likely to see, okay, where are the hotspots, where are the clusters of cases. So all of those maps show you that. So in your manuscript writing, that can also be very handy if you are doing such a type of study where you need to show us heat maps or spot maps of disease incidences. So those are different ways you can represent some data. Then you also have scatter graphs, or what we also know as scatter plots. So it uses single unconnected dots to plot instances where two variables meet. So usually a scatter plot shows correlations between two continuous variables, two numerical variables. You want to see how do they correlate, okay? And the pattern of the dots expresses relationships, which is sometimes approximated or lack of a relationship between the variables. So these are examples we have here. So there are dots. Those dots are the dots you see on the scatter plots, right? So if you draw on this first one here, this is a strong positive correlation because the line is going downwards is going from here upwards to the right. So which means that as X increases, Y also increases. All right. So you can see it's a strong positive correlation. It's a positive correlation, and it's strong because it's rather steep. Unlike this one beside it, it's also positive. As X increases, Y also increases, but it's less steep. You can see that it's a bit flatter. It's not as steep as this. So it's not a strongly positive correlation, even if it's positive, but it's not strong. So this is a weak positive correlation. Now, this third one here is a strong negative correlation, which means that as X increases, Y decreases. All right. And it's strong because it's relatively steep compared to something like this. This does not really show it clearly, but you may see some in which it just goes, it's almost flat, but it's relatively, it's not as steep as this. So that will show you a weakly negative correlation. Then you may just see all the dots scattered, no pattern. So if you want to draw a line of best fit, you won't be able to fix or fit a line that captures the center points of all of this data. So in that case, what you have is that there is no linear correlation between those two variables you are working with. So maybe something like height and weight you were trying to just see in a population and you found this kind of pattern. So that would tell you that there is no linear correlation or no linear relationship between those two variables. So this is another way you can present relationships between continuous data in your presentation. All right. So that's very important. So we'll be rounding off shortly, but let me just give us a few words on visual aids. Most journals have specific requests for the use of visuals. Some have limited number of tables and figures. Others have specifications on how to draw the tables and figures. Some have costs for producing colored photographs. Whatever it is, ensure you adhere to the journal specifications. Otherwise, your journal may not even be reviewed. It will, at the editorial stage, it will just tell you that we're not taking it forward for review because you have not met our editorial requirements. So you don't want to do that to yourself. Make sure you follow all of the requirements and their specifications as they have place them for you so that it's easy for your work to advance to that stage and move on to the peer review stage. All right, so that's very important. Then present your data well, because some people may want to use your work for a systematic review. They may want to use your work for a meta-analysis. Okay, so if your work has not been well presented, your work may not be able to fit well into a systematic review. Remember, in research, we try to generate best evidence, and systematic review is one of the top levels in which you are gathering evidence from different studies to show what works best. So if your data or if your data has not been properly presented, you may not have that opportunity to be a part of a systematic review. Your work may not have the opportunity to be a part of a systematic review just because of the sloppy presentation of your data. So ensure your data is well presented so that you can also join in the conversations for best evidence on the work you are doing. Visual illustrations have indications for use. Like the many pieces of a manuscript, your illustration and its label should be able to tell a story of the manuscript independent of the rest of the narrative. Should be able to stand alone without the narrative. Okay, so they are a part of your manuscript, and so the manuscript should be incomplete without it. Otherwise, it should not be part of the manuscript. So what that means is that your illustration, your visual aid, it's there because it's needed. So that means that if it's not there, that your work is incomplete. You cannot understand the work without that. So if that is not the case, then you don't need that visual illustration. If your work can still go ahead, everybody can still understand it without those visual illustrations, then that visual illustration is not necessary. Okay, so it's a vital part of the manuscript, which should be there if and only if it is absolutely necessary to aid our understanding of that work. All right. Then the last point I will say is this. I have said it before and I will reemphasize it. Minimize its use. It's to be an aid, not a distraction. So you shouldn't just have charts, figures, and tables flying all over the place. A maximum of 5 illustrations per manuscript is okay. Anything more than that is you're overflogging the issue. All right, so I'll be ending here, but I'd just like to let us know what we've done over the past 45 minutes thereabouts. We've been talking about the results section. So I tried to explain to us the importance of the results section, how the results section helps us see the findings based on our objectives. So the results sections must be based on the objectives. I tried to emphasize that. Then I also gave us some best practice as it relates to tables. I tried to explain what a table is, some of the best practices working with tables. Then we also talked about figures, highlighting the fact that figures are any other thing apart from tables that are used to illustrate your results. Then we also gave a few examples. We talked about bar charts, pie charts, line graphs, talked about some of those examples, and also gave us some tips on how best to use them. So at this point, I'll be ending the talk here while I welcome questions and comments. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, sir. So if we have questions, we can use the chat box or we raise our hand with the virtual raise hand. Okay, Duru Collins, you can speak.
Good morning, sir, and thank you very much for the presentation. It was very enlightening. My question is on in cases where we use questionnaires to get information pertaining a particular study, and you have different classification of these questionnaires, like strongly agree, disagree, neutral, and the rest. And do you think putting just these 2 lines, because you mentioned in the presentation that you just have to put 3 lines, one at the top, one at the bottom, one at below the headings. So I'm asking, in case of maybe using a questionnaire to answer, using a series of questions in a questionnaire to answer a particular research question, do you think it's still advisable to put lines in between just to give a clear presentation of what you're trying to say? That's my question, sir.
All right, thank you. I think we can take all the questions together so that if we have more questions, we can take them and then I'll answer all together.
Please, if you have question, we can unmute. Okay, if you can speak.
Thank you very much, sir, for the lecture. It was very enlightening. I just wanted to clarify. My question was similar to the previous person, but I also wanted to clarify the reasons why horizontal lines are not desired for tables. Is it because they can be distracting, or I wanted to know the reasons why they're not allowed. Thank you very much, sir.
Blessing, you can speak.
All right. Good morning, sir. Thank you very much for the lecture. This is MWH 012 Amadi Lois. I'm pairing with Blessing. So my question is that I noticed that in the tables that you projected, sir, some of them, the third line, the third horizontal line had double line, and then in the second one, the first one had it was just the third horizontal line that had second double line, while the next one was the first one and the third one had double horizontal line. So is there any significance to that double horizontal line? Yes.
So maybe you can answer those questions.
All right, so thank you for the questions. I think the three questions are on a similar concept of tables and the lines, why vertical lines are not allowed, or in a Likert scale kind of question where you have things like strongly disagree, disagree, neutral, agree, strongly agree, whether we could still use do without vertical lines. Okay, so let me just try and answer it how best I know. For that, let me start with the first question on the Likert scale. A Likert scale is that kind of scale you talked about where you have things like strongly disagree, disagree, neutral, agree, strongly agree. So yes, the answer is yes. Even for that type of data where you have such responses, when you are presenting your tables, you still follow that same convention, working without vertical lines. It still follows for that type. And the reason is this. So in giving the reason, it will be answering the second question that is asking about reason why vertical lines are not allowed. The reason is this. A scientific writing is not, should I call it, is not an artistic writing. It's different from creative writing. It's different from artistic writing, let me put it that way. So the essence is you want to minimize distractions as much as possible. That's one. You want to remove any redundant things as much as possible. That's two. So you don't want the vertical lines really do much. Because if you have done your tables well and spaced out your items well, the vertical lines are superfluous. They really don't add much. Just the same way your horizontal lines separating different rows don't add much. But the ones at the top and the bottom, it gives you the boundaries for your table. So that has a role to play. It gives you that boundary for your table. Then the ones beneath the headers, it also helps us clearly distinguish the table headers from the rest of the table. So scientific writing tends to be as concise as possible. There are lots of there are patterns and conventions that have been taken as rule or law in scientific writing. So this is one of it. So most manuscripts you will see, they usually tend to stick with this. Even for those of you who will be doing residency training programs, even dissertations also use this kind of pattern where it's just the top, the bottom, and then underneath the headers. So it's a convention that my thinking of that, I think I once read about it, my thinking or my understanding of that is that we want to reduce redundancies as much as possible. We don't want to distract. We're not necessarily interested in artistic design or beauty. No, we just want the numbers. We want to see them. And if you have done your table well and you've separated them well, the vertical lines add nothing extra to your work. So in manuscript writing, you don't want anything that doesn't have a role to play. Everything you are writing must have a role to play. Every word, every line, every sentence must have a role to play. Otherwise, it's not necessary. So you take it off. That's then. Someone talked about the double horizontal lines. If I understand your question, that has to do with the double horizontal lines you see at the top and at the bottom. So let me try and go back to that. Okay, I think it's here. So I guess you mean these lines up and here, right? So if it's that, so this is just for this particular work. So if you use a single line here, it still doesn't matter. So I think this is just a type of representation of that. You can use a single line, you can use a double line. It doesn't really matter that much. That's my understanding of that. So I think the reason for that was just to clearly differentiate between the borders of the table and this other line, which is within the table. So you can use a single line, you can use double lines, but it represents one line. Even if you're using this double line format, it's still one line, but a different line style. It's just the line style that is different, but it's one line, even if it's double. That's the styling. Okay. So I hope that answers your question.
So it does, sir. Thank you, sir.
All right.
Thank you very much, sir. Do we have any other question? I think there's no other question. I don't know if Dr. Kudus will be coming back here to say something.
Okay, I don't think I'm not too sure. I don't see his audio piece connected. But I think we are close to the top of the hour, which is
Yeah,
good time.
Dr. Kudus is joining.
Okay, all right.
Hello.
We can
Hello,
hear
can
you,
you hear
sir.
me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Taigbe, and all the students and TAs and the IT team. I'm sure we had a very interesting session. I was by the side reading the conversation, and I can see that there was, I can see the quality of questions asked. It means that you guys followed the discussion. So we'll meet in 2 weeks' time, not next week, in 2 weeks' time to continue the discussion. Thank you very much. other instructions will pass across to you through the chat box, through the WhatsApp platform. Bye from me.
All right. Thank
Thank
you.
you, sir.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.